welcome to the Tearsheet Podcast, where we explore financial services together with an eye on technology, innovation, emerging models, and changing expectations. I'm Tearsheet Editor-in-Chief, Zack Miller. And as digital assets mature beyond speculation into practical financial tools, forward-thinking institutions are evaluating how programmable money fits into their product strategies. For traditional banks, it's an opportunity to modernize settlement systems and explore new revenue streams. And for fintechs, it's about embedding digital asset capabilities without regulatory and technical overhead. Today, I'm joined by Ben Milne, whose journey from founding payments innovator Dwolla to now leading Brale offers interesting insights into the evolution of financial infrastructure. At Dwolla, Ben built an API-first payments platform that helped modernize ACH transfers. And now with Brale, he's creating the infrastructure layer for compliant stablecoin issuance across multiple blockchains. And what's particularly notable about Ben's transition is how it reflects broader shifts in the financial services landscape, from renovating legacy rails to building entirely new ones. In our conversation, I hope we'll unpack how this experience shaped Brale's approach to working with both incumbents and challengers, the strategic considerations for institutions exploring stablecoins, and what product and strategy executives should be planning for this in this rapidly evolving space. Ben, welcome to the Tearsheet Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So we covered Dwolla years ago, and you guys were really ahead of things there. And I'm curious about the journey from founding Dwolla, which focused on modernizing traditional payment rails, to now building stablecoin infrastructure, as Brale represents an interesting evolution for you. And so what key lessons from your Dwolla experience shaped how you're approaching financial infrastructure at Brale?
Well, the good news is we only have about 20 minutes, so we can't really get into even remotely close to all of it. But generally speaking, Dwolla was a really incredible project. And I think one of the things that we learned was we built a lot of just incredible things that were maybe ahead of their time. And finding the API fit, which really, I feel, kind of created some of the leadership in almost like BaaS infrastructure, fintech API layers, really was a great segue for the company, and is still, the business operates with that business line today. And when I left maybe about 5 years ago, that continued to really be the focus for the business. And, after 10 years, I needed to go for a walk in the woods and recover a little bit. And I did that. And what I started thinking about a couple years later with friends was really, what is the next opportunity, and what unique skill set might I have that I could bring to that opportunity? And at the time, the shift was that protocols were becoming much better and were sort of like on the time horizon of being the better tool for the job. And stablecoins clearly seemed to be the use case for those protocols, but creating them was really expensive and really hard. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like how we arrived at what has really become Brale.
So I think to get this right, I mean, when you're working building stablecoins, are a lot of the people, a lot of the institutional people you're working with on the banking side?
There's a lot of complexity, Zach.
Yeah.
We work with banks every day on different partnerships, and some of those financial institutions are interested in their own digital deposit initiatives. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's accelerated post FDIC and OCC changes over the past, 3 and 6 months. But a lot of what we see really takes three forms. One is across payments, another is across embedded finance, and the third is financial institutions. But mm-hmm. the adoption arc is meaningfully different for each. And the pull right now, from an innovation perspective, I think is really happening in payments and embedded finance.
So we totally hear that from the guests on this show. Like, banking, traditional banking is typically a laggard and the last to, join the party. I'm just curious in some of the interactions that you have with them, if you could benchmark that against the early days at Dwolla. To me, I feel like banks are more receptive and learning how to partner quicker and have at least an infrastructure to be able to differentiate their work in that space than they did 10 years ago. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, it's hard sometimes to baseline. When I was working on some of those early projects, some of those things were almost 15 years ago, Zach. And certainly I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago,
another lifetime
10
ago.
or 15.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And so I've been fortunate that a lot of things have happened to me over the period of that 15 years that has made talking to financial institutions much different. Certainly one has been building a company that I feel is a trusted part of the ecosystem. But another is simply, I had the opportunity to learn about how clearing and payment systems work, sort of like studying from the master, Sunil at CME, for years. And, getting access to market infrastructures and things like that, which really gave me maybe some of the verbal tools to communicate with and understand what some of the banks actually need and want, and clearly what they don't, and maybe what might not be a good fit. Something that is meaningfully different in the current environment, Zach, is that I think for years people have been using blockchain as kind of like a buzzword, but we're getting to a point where the technology, even in a bank environment with infrastructures and protocols like Canton, can actually be utilized to mimic internal systems that look and feel like bank core systems, but are running on distributed protocols. So suddenly you can actually build products that behave the way that your regulators are happy with, but also inside of the advantages of the new technology. And even those things are relatively new. I think we deployed the first stablecoins on Canton, maybe even just in Q1 of this year. It's so early and it's all happening so fast. I think it's just going to be really exciting to see what happens.
I mean, we have guests on the show, from the traditional banking industry, still talking about moving to the cloud. So, I mean, like, to me, this feels like outer space, but I guess from that point of view, are banks thinking about, so again, you can mimic the way the traditional systems or platforms work with on a distributed infrastructure, but are they thinking about the added benefits of what a distributed infrastructure would get, or it's more just still like building an infrastructure layer for them right now?
I think the answer is yes to all of those things, but we should appreciate that, to your comment about the cloud. If you think about those three forms, payments, embedded finance, and financial institutions, the arc of adoption inside of financial institutions from core technology perspectives is 30 to 50 years. Cloud computing is 30 years old, and it's still not the default thing running financial infrastructure in the United States. It hasn't reached like peak adoption yet. And so if protocols and stablecoins, digital deposits, CBDCs are in like the first 3 to 5 years of that 30 to 50 year arc, what's going to happen is that, yes, early edge actors are going to adopt these and build new businesses around them, but there's also going to be a lot of innovation that maybe kind of like doesn't work out. And it's going to take a long time to really reach the end user. And hopefully it happens faster than cloud computing has, but we'll see. It might take that long.
Sure. Definitely in it for the long run. I guess I'd love to hear your pitch and how you're positioning Brale when you are speaking to that third piece, the financial institutions. What's the value proposition? How are you positioning it to them?
On the third one, it's pretty simple. Most of those folks want to hold deposits or hold the actual underlying capital in their financial institution. So they need a regulated partner, which we are, to help them deploy the tokenized dollar deposit equivalent into blockchains in a legal, compliant, and reportable manner, where it really looks more like you're servicing as a technical vendor, almost like an FIS or a Jack Henry. And those folks would simply utilize our technical infrastructure. And so for them,
they're tokenizing their own deposits. That's the use case.
Yeah, correct. A lot of financial institutions are interested in talking about some of that. Some utilize us for the concept of just on-ramping and off-ramping, where they know stablecoins could be something they could use in their workflows with their customers, but the bank doesn't actually really want to touch the digital asset. They just need somebody to almost like liquidate that to get it into an underlying G&L account or an operations account in some way. We think that's a really good use case. And for a lot of our customers, they're sort of comparing and contrasting with, should we spend 2 years and $100 million in building our own stablecoin infrastructure and all of the things, or should we work with Brale and we get it in a minute and for $1? And so the step function improvement over the last thing is just like so laughably better that's really what's pulling a lot of our business today, to be honest, Zach.
Gotcha. Maybe switch gears to those first two customer sets. So they were the embedded finance and payments customers. What are the benefits there? Can you talk about how you're positioning Brale as well?
Yeah, I think it's about helping people realize the benefits of protocols. And so, Brale is a way in which you can gain access to the benefits of protocols. And the first benefit is that you reduce actual technical overhead by using a system that is better, faster, cheaper, and when implemented correctly, safer. So you reduce costs. And then if you're in the payments flows somewhere, stablecoins are an incredible way to introduce new revenues by adopting a new technology without actually replacing any of the old stuff. You're just augmenting a payment flow with a protocol. So for most of these implementations, they're reducing costs and driving revenue by introducing a new technology that extends the function of the dollar. It's almost like an obnoxiously obvious thing once you see it, and it doesn't really typically change their businesses. It just makes them more efficient and helps them make more money.
Well, that sounds like a good pitch to me. So where is the friction? Where is some of the pushback coming from?
Zach, we are drowning in demand. I think one of the things
Awesome place to be.
we misunderstood what the global demand was for USD dollar-backed stablecoins across n number of blockchains. And the reason that's important is because one of the core advantages to the way
Thank
that
you,
we build our
POTUS,
technical,
right? That's also a gift that keeps on giving. Yeah.
The environment today is different than the environment when we got started. And I think that environment will continue to ebb and flow. But totally to your point, there is more global awareness now about this being something that is not likely to be turned off in the United States when you have, people from the actual Fed saying stablecoins are great, going on the record saying this is the role they play in sort of like American prosperity, and making these really broad overarching statements about the positivity of the role they play. It does make sales easier. And I think that the challenge sometimes can just be working on the wrong types of opportunities, but the world is full of the right ones right now. So we're not flying around to a bunch of conferences. We're talking on a couple podcasts every once in a while, but I don't know if you can hear the engineer in the background. We're just kind of like in Iowa building the thing.
I want to hear the bells going off with the sales closed in real time. No, so I had asked what the pushback was. Is it prioritization with some of your customers, work on different projects? Because if you're lowering costs and increasing revenues, like you said, it sounds like relative no brainer without having to change your real business. Where does some of the friction come in?
I don't want to say there's never friction, but I think we do a nice job of focusing on the opportunities and the partnerships and the clients who are really bought into the same general benefits that we are. And because we are very small, Zach, we're not even 15 people yet. We run a really lean operation. A lot of the things that we do are kind of based on you already knowing you want a stable coin when you come to us. And there's probably another evolution of growth that will require us to go more deeply out to the market and more meaningfully educate.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But, thankfully, it kind of looks like B of A and Stripe and some other folks are probably doing that for us at the moment. And we're happy to suck up some of the opportunity as it comes through.
Well, that's an interesting point. So you run lean. I think I remember back to Dwolla days. I think that was also a priority in the company as well. Running lean. Dealing with large institutions, is there a David and Goliath tension there? Is the smallness an advantage, or how do you work with big companies that are used to just throwing people at problems?
Yeah, the good news is big companies normally need the same things that small companies need. They just need different words to be used and a different process to be followed and a different reporting
this is not your first rodeo. Yeah.
Right. The 10 years ago me would have been in fisticuffs, and I'm just getting too old for that. And I think what I've just realized is that 99.9% of the time when a financial institution and somebody working in protocols thinks they disagree and are almost like getting louder and competing with each other, they're violently agreeing. They just don't know the words the other one is using. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time just translating between people as calmly as we can. And what we find is that by the end of it, people actually are in agreement. They all want the same thing. They want to run more efficient businesses in compliance with their regulators that generate more profits, and protocols and stablecoins are an obvious way to do that. And so once people realize that, there's another 40 people we don't yet need on staff, because really they just need to log in and deploy the stablecoin, which before us, you stood on ceremony and meetings. You flew to New York for God knows how long, or to what other part of the world, and now you just log in and do it.
That's awesome. So the use case on the financial institution side is primarily, tokenizing deposits. In your roadmap or in the future, do you envision banks or other financial institutions looking at other assets to tokenize?
Yeah, absolutely. We see this all the time with financial institutions of different shapes and size wanting to tokenize different financial products that maybe those go through OTC desks or ATSs or different desks in different parts of the futures market or something like that. Once we realize, I think collectively, that we can tokenize just about anything with the right custodial infrastructures, the efficiencies to be gained are just incredible. And the same things just kind of apply across every tokenization strategy. If implemented well, is it should increase efficiency, and it should actually increase, I mean, honestly, revenues and profits.
I get that. I want to go back to something you said before, and I'd like to understand better the advantages of a financial institution having their own stablecoin versus building off of accepted stablecoin like USDC or something like that.
I think with anything else, it comes with the ability to create customization when they're running their own program. And one of the, I think, misconceptions people have is that they're creating their own stablecoin and they're competing with like a Tether or a Circle. They're absolutely not. The beautiful part about protocols is like you're just creating something new that's interoperable with the last thing. And so if you are able to build a new stablecoin or digital asset that services your client base, that increases efficiency and generates new revenues, that's the same reason that you would build a home banking portal or a mobile banking portal or want to build new products. And so I think the rationale becomes the same, but sometimes the mental models of this versus this tends to get in our way. My hope is that over the next 5 to 10 years, we can all sort of like relieve ourselves of that, because if you have a stablecoin with any volume, it's compatible with the rest of DeFi and the rest of whatever's on the protocol, because that's how they're designed.
Is it tied to how large or how vast the financial institution is, like a JP Morgan Chase versus, a smaller regional bank? Like, are there reasons why one would adopt this and not?
I think the challenges are far more social than they are technical. A big financial institution is going to have different audit requirements, security oversight. They're going to want to control the contracts and signing mechanisms more closely. But functionally speaking, the asset is going to move on the same protocol as someone building a P2P app that doesn't have a single customer. And so at the end of the day, you have financial institutions vetting these global protocols that as the updates are made in order to serve them. Solana has great examples of this. Canton, I think, is another great example. And by Solana, I mean token standards on Solana. But as soon as they're there for a big financial institution, anybody who can pull down a little bit of code can now start building applications on that same industrial infrastructure. That's just amazing to me. Like, no flying anywhere, no trying to get a room at a nice hotel so you don't look like a hack. You just pull the code down and benefit from this beautiful infrastructure. And if you're smart, you can just make use of that. I just think that's an incredible change in the world.
Given the complexity in this world, vis-a-vis how banks relate to it, I'm kind of curious, if you're a product guy at an FI, are they rationalizing a build versus buy decision, or is it clear that they have to work with firms like Brale?
I want to be thoughtful with my words, because I think there are so many brilliant technologists working in financial institutions around the world that there is a countless number of teams that if they chose to build some of this infrastructure, they can, and they should, and they will. And I think that's really exciting. And then there is another group of participants in the global infrastructure where some of them might even be struggling with like implementing their own version of Salesforce, for example, or their next core upgrade, or something else where they're not thinking about building their own core systems. And if they're not of that sort of like technical capability, the likelihood that they should be thinking about operating their own infrastructure to run their own MPC signing across a number of blockchains and manage all of the compliance ramifications around access controls and reporting, the likelihood of that is very low. So I do think there's folks that they're just going to roll their own because, man, you can and you should and you will. And then there's a large part of the planet that they don't have the $100 million or the $1 billion budget to pull that off. They want a good partner they can trust. And that's Brale's opportunity, is being the good partner they can trust.
Can you talk a little bit more, Ben? You mentioned like you could start working on Brale for $1. Can you talk about, I guess, your revenue model, your pricing model?
Absolutely. Our core business is helping our clients launch stablecoins quickly on a number of blockchains. And so when you come build a stablecoin with us, we try to remove the barriers as much as humanly possible. But as you want additional features, we make those available to you. So there's a SaaS element to the business. We also operate our direct integrations with all of the blockchains that we implement, and we bill our clients back for gas fees. So there's a variable function to it. We also generate revenues based on the program revenues our clients' stablecoins generate. We give most of that revenue back to our clients, but obviously we make money when they make money, and that's just like a card issuance program. We mimic all these things after card issuance programs for a reason. And certainly one of the things that's very different for Brale is we also operate core network infrastructure for some of the blockchains that we implement with. So if you're issuing a card on Visa, you're really never going to be able to get access to sort of like some of the Visa net economics. Really, those are reserved for Visa. In a protocol environment, we can go get program economics or network economics by operating a validator node or something like that in the network. And so we also proactively provide technical infrastructure to certain networks, and that's a revenue stream for the business. So in comparison to some sort of like of my previous life, where honestly, I felt like sometimes you're trying to squeeze blood out of a rock and just trying to like figure it out, the demand for the protocols is so great that there's lots of opportunities to generate revenue. It's just trying to move the levers in ways where it provides revenue to us and also to our client. So simultaneously it reduces cost for them and produces revenue. And where we can find that balance, that's really exciting for us.
Yeah. It also sounds like you're aligning yourself on the same side of the table as your clients.
100%.
You win, they win. For fintech executives building products on top of, say, payments infrastructure, one of the other use cases, how do you see the relationship between traditional payment rails and blockchain-based systems evolving over the next 3 to 5 years?
Initially, I think it is difficult to see because the mental model between protocols and payment rails is different. But if we force ourselves to think about it in the same way, if I'm a business or a fintech and I'm going to go add RTP, I'm going to go deal with a bank. I'm going to pre-fund that RTP account. I'm going to get instructions from my customers, and then I'm going to pass those instructions through to the bank where they settle on RTP, pulls down the debits in the RTP pre-funded balance. Functionally, what's happening there is you put a little bit of money in the bank to basically make payouts in real time. And then you're going to send API instructions sort of like per type of payment. And so if you think about adding payment stablecoins, it's really the same type of implementation. You're just not working with a bank, you're working with a non-bank, because in a stablecoin issuer world, most of the issuers are non-banks like Brale. And so you open an account with the non-bank, and then you send instructions. And those are on-chain payment instructions to deliver a stablecoin payment to the receiver. And it pulls down, and then you get a webhook back that says, okay, the money moved. So the implementation actually looks almost perfectly analogous to when you added RTP, when you added same-day ACH, when you're adding FedNow, when you're adding whatever this payment type is. You're just working with a non-bank to facilitate the payments as opposed to working with a bank, because you have to be a bank to participate in the RTP network and help originate. But obviously the way stablecoins are designed is, certainly in the previous administration, you really had to be a non-bank in order to participate. And in the future, I think banks are going to be able to participate too, which is really exciting.
I have one last question for you, Ben, before I let you go and get back to ringing the bell. What are some of the big, hairy, audacious goals you have for Brale this year as you think about where you're headed, both as a company and maybe personally and professionally?
Oh, that's a good question, Zach. You're catching me on a unique day. I just sent the May update, and we've exceeded our wildest expectations for the year. And so one of the things that we are trying to do in May is rethink how does that reframe or allow us the freedom to think about the world in a more accelerated way. And so we're in the midst of kind of figuring out what those new goals are. But the good news is we are rethinking them because everything is moving so much faster than anything else we've ever been a part of or imagined.
Amazing.
We have the opportunity to think about that. And what an incredible moment in time and world we live in, where right place, right time. I think we got timing on this one dead on.
And thanks for joining us on the Tearsheet Podcast today, and best of luck the rest of the year.
Thanks, Zach.